Right, it is on my clock 1 minute past 7, so it gives me great pleasure to say a very warm welcome to everyone for our MPA Day webinar for recreational anglers. My name is Judy Mann and I work for the Two Oceans Aquarium Foundation in Cape Town. In 2021, we started Marine Protected Areas Day to build awareness and support for South Africa's marine protected areas. And since our first Marine Protected Areas Day, things have actually grown really nicely. And this year we've had support from around the world. In fact, this morning there was a full day webinar running in Tanzania where they were looking at management of marine protected areas with a whole range of different participants. In fact, they had about 70 people with them. Earlier today, we had a live crossing virtual tour to several of our MPAs with about 60 odd participants. A team of people walked the whole length of the Alawal Shoal MPA. We had activities in schools in Sodwana, and tonight we have a speakers night at the Two Oceans Aquarium. So around the world and around South Africa, we're really starting to highlight and start to talk about marine protected areas, which many people have never even heard of. Now, one group that definitely doesn't need the introduction to what a marine protected area is are recreational anglers. And tonight's webinar is really aiming to bring together scientists, managers, and recreational anglers to discuss some of the pros and cons of marine protected areas in South Africa. Recreational anglers don't always support MPAs, but it's only through real open discussion and a willingness to share perspectives that some of the challenges to managing these important areas will actually be overcome. We've got an amazing lineup of people here to share ideas with you and to talk, and we're going to have an open discussion between the panelists to start off with. After that, we're going to then be able to open it up, hopefully, to some question and answers. So as we go through the webinar, if you do have questions, please put your questions in the Q&A box. We will be watching it and hopefully trying to answer your questions as well. So we really want to make this participatory. But first, we are going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves. We've got 78 people with us so far. So really good to have you all with us, and a very warm welcome to all of you. So without any further preamble from me, Warren, would you mind introducing yourself, please?
Sure, Judy, thanks very much. And I'm really so happy to see that we've got so many people with an interest in this particular topic. So to introduce myself, my name's Warren Potts. I've been a recreational angler my entire life. So much so that I ended up guiding in Angola for 2 years. I also fish competitively in the Raspel Leagues, and I've been doing that for about 10 years. But professionally, I'm a researcher at the Department of Ichthyology and Fisheries Science, and there I actually study all aspects of recreational angling, from the governance of recreational angling, its management, economics, catch and release impacts, improving angler environmental behavior, and the impacts of recreational fisheries on fish populations. I've also managed quite a few programs that have involved MPAs. For example, I was involved in managing the monitoring of the Titicaca National Park's fish populations for some time, for about, I don't know, probably about 8 years. And more recently, I've been working on a project that's been looking at the consequences of recreational fishing on fish populations. And in particular, the ability of how fishing reduces the ability of fish populations to adapt to the impacts of climate change. It's been a pretty interesting project, and I'm hopefully I'll have some time to chat to you a little bit about it a bit later. Thanks.
Thanks, Warren, for that great introduction. Next on my screen, I've got Donovan Solomon. Would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, thanks, Judy. Yes, good evening, everybody. My name's Donovan Solomon. Yeah, so basically I've spent most of my life in recreational angling, from, born and bred in Durban, mainly light tackle, estuary sort of fishing. And then, yeah, spearfishing is my real passion. I've been spearfishing since I was maybe 12 or 13 years old. But yeah, I've always had a very, very strong connection to conservation. I've always been very aware of my footprint, as it were, in what I do. More recently, I was involved with I was on the Protea Banks MPA Forum Committee. I worked with Bruce quite a bit in all the public interaction with the Protea Banks in specific. And at the moment, I'm the president of South African Underwater Fishing Federation. So that's sort of quite a big focus of mine at the moment. And a big part of what I really enjoy is competitive spearfishing. So I try and attend as many comps around the country as I can and that type of thing. Yeah, I've been with the fish tagging sort of group for the last few years as well. So it's a big thing that myself and my kids enjoy doing.
Thanks, Donovan. That's a great introduction. Thank you. Pierre, let's go to you next.
Well, thanks, Judy. I'm Pierre de Villiers, Marine and Coastal Operations for Cape Nature. We've got a marine focus now in Cape Nature that's relatively new and very exciting, setting up new units. We're responsible for the management of about 10 marine protected areas and the bigger islands and several estuaries. Yeah, it's an exciting field. I love the management. I didn't ever have the patience to be a recreational angler, so I turned to spearfishing as a hobby. But I really like protecting and looking after them. Management and monitoring and awareness. I think there are three kind of needs in the field that must happen successfully to really make a difference. Thank you.
Thanks, Pierre. Bruce, over to you next.
Thanks, Judy. Good evening, everybody. And yeah, thanks very much for making time to come and listen to us. Just to introduce myself quickly, I'm a recently retired senior scientist. I was based at the Oceanographic Research Institute in Durban for the past 30 years. I started my career working in the Tsitsikamma National Park down at Storms River, and I worked on the biology of blacktail and zebra, two little reef fish species. And I was an MSc student, but that time down in the MPA really gave me a tremendous opportunity to see with my own eyes the value of how protecting fish stocks can really work. And I went and had a look at my colleague Clinton Berger's thesis this afternoon just to work out how far we swam transects underwater. You'd be interested, Warren. We swam 34 kilometers of transects underwater in Tsitsikamma and in the adjacent areas, comparing the size of the fish and the species inside and outside Tsitsikamma. So that's where it started. I joined ORI in 1992, and I've continued to be involved in marine protected area research, and particularly on the monitoring side ever since. I started a program in the Isimangaliso MPA, north of Cape Vidal, where we monitored shore angling fish stocks for 21 years using catch and release. And that was what I did my PhD on. A few years later, I was involved in helping to establish the Ponderland MPA between Port Edward and Port St. John's, and also set up a reef fish monitoring project there that was offshore work. So I've been involved in MPA research and monitoring for most of my working career. And based on my experience working in these areas, and it's been an absolute privilege to do so, I'm absolutely convinced of the necessity of these areas to look after our fish stocks along the South African coast. So I'm a real advocate for these areas. Thanks, Judy.
Thanks. Thanks, Bruce. John, over to you next.
Do you unmute me or do I unmute me?
You can unmute yourself, John.
Right, you hearing me? Hi everyone, my name is John Rance. I come from Stutterheim in the Eastern Cape. I'm a fisherman and a hunter, and I believe in sustainable use of natural resources. Our deep sea fishing takes place out of the Kara River mouth, which is the eastern boundary of the now much expanded Amatola MPA region. Decided to create voluntary offshore marine sanctuaries some 43 years ago. At that time, I didn't think it was visionary. I thought it was a damn nuisance and promptly went fishing in the reserves because they were voluntary. I was soon put right by some tough club committee members who informed me that if I was ever seen in the sanctuary again, and if I didn't toe the line and join the club, it would be to the detriment of my health. This taught me that you can actually get people to comply if you need to. So I sulkily complied. And some 4 years later, we struck Shangri-La in an unfished reef. In today's times, one can't even imagine what it was like to fish reefs like that. After pulling lots of fish off the reef, we decided to protect it, fish it only occasionally, and to jealously guard its location. But it was discovered by some local commercial skippers, and within 6 months, there were no fish left on that reef. And when I say no fish, I mean no fish. We were appalled. This created an abhorrence in us of the plundering of the fish resource. My predecessor as Border Deep Sea Angling Association's environmental officer was the late Graham Winch. For many years, he wrote some brilliant articles for Skiboat magazine. In those, he pushed for less plundering and greater protection of our resources, which lighted my fuse. So when he retired, I took over the position and set about trying to involve our clubs in the protection of the local MPAs.
Thanks, John. That's a really nice personal introduction. And I think that you've set the scene very nicely from a fisherman's perspective. So thank you for that. And I've left the youngest for last, Rob Kyle, who is in the dark. Rob, over to you.
Good evening, Judy, and the rest of you all. Apologies for the lack of picture, some technical difficulties there. So introduce myself. I'm Rob Kyle, the son of Scotty Kyle, who worked for Ezemvelo as a scientist for over 30 years based at Cozy Bay. So I was very fortunate to grow up at Cozy with the rest of the family. Mom took the brave step to homeschool us. So we did manage to get the full experience of growing up in that amazing area. And growing up there, we were introduced to MPAs from a very, very young age. And Dad explained to us how important they are from the beginning. During my final school years, I was involved at Ushaka SeaWorld when we were moving from the old facility across to the new one on the animal collecting side of things. And then as soon as I finished school, I was offered a full-time job with Sandra as Ushaka SeaWorld, working with the team that was collecting animals for the aquarium. I took a short break a few years after that to film fishing DVDs with mates of mine. And then a few years later, I came back to Sandra in 2010. And I'm still there now, but the only difference is now I'm one of the guys managing the team that maintains all the exhibits. So a couple of changes over the years, but nothing too drastic. I've fished my whole life. It's one of the earliest memories I've got is fishing. I started competitive rock and surf angling quite late in life compared to many people. Just the circumstances at Cozy didn't really allow it. And then since then, I've worked my way up through the ranks. I've now represented South Africa a number of times at senior level, and I'm still currently representing South Africa. And as I've sort of got more involved in it and more involved in the science side of things as well, with the connection with Bruce and Sandra and all of that, I've taken over the position of conservation officer. Initially, it was with the KZN CIU at a provincial level, More recently, I've been part of KZN Inland Shore Angling Association, where I hold the same position of conservation officer. And I'm just now going into my third year holding the position for SASA, which is the national governing body of rock and surf angling. Yeah, it is very close to my heart trying to create awareness amongst the angling fraternity regarding sustainable utilization and all that goes with it. And I think in this day and age, I think MPAs are absolutely critical to the future, basically to having fish to catch going forward. And us as anglers, if we don't recognize that and respect it, I don't really see too many other ways forward. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell. Thanks, Judy.
Thanks, Rob. We're now going to move on to the questions. So the first question that we have to pose is, what are the benefits of MPAs to recreational anglers? Bruce, if you can just give us a short, brief answer on that one, and then we'll open it up to the other panelists, please. Thank you.
Sure, thanks, Judy. Yeah, I think there are a couple of things that come to mind immediately in terms of what are the benefits of MPAs to recreational fishermen. The first is if you close an area, and it's kind of logical. If you stop fishing in an area and it's good habitat, the first thing that you see is that the number of fish start to increase, and over time those fish get bigger. But this is particularly in a well-managed no-take MPA, so where there's no fishing allowed. So you'll see this rapid recovery of the fish stocks. Over time, once the resident fish populations, and I'm here focusing on the resident species, not the sort of migratory species that are moving through, but the ones that live in these areas, have their home ranges in the MPA. Once they've reached a natural carrying capacity, they then begin to spill over into the adjacent fished areas. That's both through their transport of eggs and larvae, which are pelagic in the water column that drift out, and also the physical movement of sub-adult and adult fish. There's just no more space. There's no more niche space for those fish to live in the MPA, so they move out looking for habitat outside. And in that way, the MPA acts like a reservoir and seeds the adjacent areas. The third thing that comes to mind is the fact that you protect these fish for a long time. You allow them to reach a big size. We get something called, that scientists have called the BOF hypothesis, the big old fat fecund female fish. It's a lovely acronym. But basically what these big old fish are able to do is, because they've lived for longer, they've survived, they've recovered from disease, they've escaped predators, they've got good genetics, and they pass that on to their offspring. We've been able to prove that the offspring of these bigger females have a much better chance of survival. The survival rate of the eggs and larvae is better. And as a consequence, protecting these big old females in an MPA is definitely one of the ways to go. I think some of Warren's work has been looking at the actual physiology and the genetics of fish in MPAs, and what he's been finding and what we're seeing, and it also makes sense, is that the fish in these no-take MPAs are fitter physiologically and fitter genetically speaking than the fish outside. And those are through ecological things like competition with each other, predation, that kind of thing. So these fish are adapting to a natural life environment in an MPA much better than fish do in a fished area outside. Hopefully Warren can discuss that a bit more just now. The fourth thing I wanted to just mention was that fish communities that are protected within MPA, so now I'm looking at all the species, you actually find complete differences between the fish community in a no-take MPA compared to a fished area outside. And the reason for that is simply because of fishing. If you think about it, fishing, often if you go and fish on a reef, a virgin reef, the first fish that you catch are the biggest aggressive predatory fish, and those get removed very quickly by fishing. So fishing on a reef area quickly denudes it of those big top predators. So the community of fish can be completely different. And people like Ant Bernard have shown this using underwater video cameras inside and outside MPA. So it's very clear that we have this, there are less big dominant predatory fish inside. And I think because of all these facts that I've been mentioning, MPAs are able to make our fish stocks and our marine biodiversity more resilient to climate change, which is happening as we speak. The hottest temperatures recorded on human time have been this last summer. And I think all these factors that I've mentioned are ultimately of benefit to recreational anglers. So hopefully that can just set the scene to chat a bit more about this question, Judy.
Thanks, Bruce. I think there are two things there. The first one is in terms of benefits to recreational fishers. Warren, maybe you can talk a little bit about the changes that you've seen in terms of the research you've done. And then I'm going to ask maybe John or Donovan to talk about what they've seen from a recreational fisherman point of view.
Thanks, Judy. Yeah, so we've just completed are completing a project looking at the impacts of fishing on fish populations. And one of the things that we found is if you imagine any fish species, it sort of has a natural thermal range. That's its optimal range. And then outside of that range, it doesn't perform very well. So as a fisherman, you'll know in certain temperatures, you won't catch fish species X, but you'll catch something else. And every species is pretty much like that. But within each species, there's quite a lot of variability in terms of that range of temperatures. So think of it about as like humans, for example. Some people get really cold quickly and others get hot quickly. And fish are pretty much the same. There's a lot of individual variability. So when you're fishing in particular, say you're fishing in conditions that are cold for a particular species, you are likely to catch individuals that prefer those cold temperatures. And likewise, if you fish in warm conditions, you're likely to take out those individuals that are good in warm conditions. But within fish populations, there are also individuals that can perform extremely well over a broad range of temperatures. And we call those the high performance individuals. The problem with those is that those are potentially being taken out at all temperatures. And they're being taken out more than fish with, for example, a narrow thermal range. And our real concern with that is that as we go forward into a far more variable climate condition, fishing is going to be removing those fish out of the populations. And as a consequence, we don't have fish that are able to deal with future conditions. So for me, and we showed the big differences between the thermal tolerance or the thermal performance of fish inside and outside of marine protected areas. It was a surprise that it was so evident and very, very different when we tested like similar places, but one in an MPA and one outside of an MPA. We saw these real differences, and we realized that these high performers were being removed out by fishing. And so what the marine protected areas do is they provide us with that reserve of these high performers. And the other interesting thing that we found was that those performers actually pass on those genes of high performance to the next generation. So what fishing is doing is it's causing our fish to evolve to become less adaptable to a future climate. But luckily, MPAs are providing us with that source that can at least provide us with individuals that can adapt in the future. And I think that was, I mean, it was staggering, and it's something that hasn't been found anywhere around the world before. So, and the only reason we could do it is, and find this, is because we have these beautiful, fantastic sanctuary marine protected areas. And there are very few other places in the world that actually have this. And if I compare it to example, what I saw recently, I was at a conference in Europe and the UK, those MPAs are not there. They don't have these sanctuary areas, and those high performing fish are gone. out of their populations, and their environments are heating so quickly, they are going to have literally massive problems in their fisheries. We have this wonderful reservoir in our MPAs, and I advocate strongly for maintaining them and possibly promulgating more, particularly in areas where there's variable thermal conditions happening, so that we can actually protect the fish that are there, because some of those individuals are going to be the ones that will be our fish of the future.
Thanks, Warren. I think it's really interesting research that probably no one's really thought much about. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. Donovan, as a diver, what differences do you see between in protected areas and out of protected areas?
Well, the first thing I want to comment on is Bruce's idea of, this concept of the spillover sort of effect. And, I'm very fortunate to be very close to the Ponderland MPA. And, I've been fishing and spearfishing this sort of piece of the South Coast for a very long time. And without a doubt, this concept or this phenomenon is definitely happening. There's a couple of species that I'd probably highlight. One is the Scotsman. The number of Scotsmen in sort of, I'd say maybe a 30 or 40 kilometer radius of, well, north, I'd say 40 kilometers north of the Ponderland MPA. The Scotsman is just really, really predominant. And I think that might also fall into one of Warren's sort of high strength, aggressive fish. They're the first to jump on the bait. When we spearfish, I get to the bottom, they're one of the first fish to appear, although they might, they are generally quite scared, but they'll show themselves and then move on. So the Scotsman for me has been absolutely incredible, I'd say, over the last 10 years. So that's a real success story, I think. Like I've seen like shoals of Scotsmen that are 7-8 kilos. I've shot them 7-6 kilos, like sort of annually. I can go and get 1 or 2, through the year. This is like 10-15 years ago, there was no chance, absolutely no chance. So yeah, I put it down to the spillover. Yeah, but then also on that point, I can dive on the line right next to the MPA, and it's absolutely barren, eh? It's there's no rock cod, there's no rubber lip. So I don't know, it's a difficult thing to really put into perspective. I think maybe needs more time.
Thanks, Donovan. I think that when scientists say there's spillover, people go, and when fishermen say we see the spillover, it becomes a very different thing. So thank you for that observation. But as you say, lots of variability. I see Piers put his hand up, and then I'm going to maybe quickly go to John. I'm not sure that we're going to get through all our questions, but we'll do our best.
I'll be quick. I mean, there was a classic example of red Roman in Kokama Marine Protected Area. I think Sven and a couple of the fishery scientists in Cape Town did a study, and they monitored the catches of red Roman in the recreational and the commercial fishes from Neisner, the boat fishing. And on declaration, it's literally from the year of declaration, the catches went through the roof from spillover. Well, that's what they said, from spillover. And there is a scientific paper on that. So we've done stakeholder engagement, and we've mentioned that to all the stakeholders. So I think it's an accepted fact. But like Donovan says, we've got to try and prove it somehow, and on a regular basis, just to verify it.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right, Pierre, and to do it in different areas too, which is important. John, I can see that you're ready to say something.
Yeah, am I unmuted? Bruce, I thought a boff was you. Weren't you a boffin? From our side, fishing is similar in many ways to hunting. It's an expression of an atavistic instinct resulting in a consumptive activity. And like all instincts, rather than being repressed, should be guarded to eliminate negative consequences. The best way to do that is to make it sustainable. And like it or not, humankind's survival is coupled with sustainability. One can't take more out of the earth than nature or mankind can replace. And until we learn to measure and manage marine consumption sustainably, the only way we can ensure that species aren't eliminated is to close off areas and to protect them. They then serve as feeders to adjacent exploited areas. I'll talk a bit later on some of the benefits, on some of the results of the research that was done in our MPA. But one of the best terrestrial examples of this were the controlled hunting areas in Rhodesia, then Zimbabwe, until destroyed by Mugabe, which were exploitable areas adjacent to national parks and which were fully protected. And they virtually funded the national parks and were never capable of being completely eliminated because they are being fed. When MPAs are fully stocked, they will overflow into adjacent exploitable areas and become, and because the fish survive for longer, they will be bigger. From recreational fishers' point of view, they are absolutely essential to the survival of our pastime and to its sustainability.
Thanks, John. I think those are strong points there, which are really important for us. I am going to actually let Rob have a say on this one as well, because otherwise he's going to tell me I left him out. So, Rob, your perspective?
Thanks, Judy. I was feeling a bit left out there. I think something we also need to remember, or certainly an advantage that we see as anglers in KZN, is that you can have an MPA and you can still have catch and release areas within that MPA. The Ismangaliso MPA is a prime example, and a lot of us will spend a lot of money to travel all the way to Ismangaliso to fish in those catch and release areas. We get all the pleasure of catching some amazing fish, which are no longer available anywhere else on the coast, basically. Hopefully we handle them well and we release them, and we've had our fun, and with very little impact on the environment. So I think that in itself is something that the MPAs have to offer as well. And in KZN, we've gone so far as to even fish competitions inside these catch and release areas in the MPAs, but to try and reduce our footprint further, we've implemented specific regulations on ourselves to try and further reduce the impact that we've had, or the lasting impact that we've had. So we've changed over to only fishing with circle hooks in these areas, to ban all stainless steel hooks, to make our competitions 100% catch and release, whether we are in a controlled area, which stipulates catch and release only, or in an open area in the MPA. So yeah, I think there's huge benefits that we get as both as competitive anglers and just as straight recreational anglers, having these areas within the MPAs where we are able to practice our sport and our pastime and our recreation, and hopefully have very little impact on the environment.
Thanks, Rob. I think that you've brought up the issue of zonation, which is, I think, quite an important point, because people have different perspectives of how MPAs actually work. So I'm just going to quickly ask Bruce to just give us very, very short response to why have South African MPAs been effective in protecting marine biodiversity, just in general. If you can just do very, very quickly, Bruce, because then we'll just do another round there, because I'd like to get to the question about challenges and delve into that one a little bit more.
Sure, will do, Judy. So the question is, why have South Africa's MPAs been effective at protecting our marine biodiversity? And I think, firstly, it's because we've got a good network of MPAs. They extend all the way from the tropical northeast up at the Ismangaliso, all the way around the Cape Point and up to the west coast to Namakwa. So we've got a well-distributed network protected areas, which is really important because there are a whole lot of different species that are found in these different regions around the coastline. Secondly, I think we've done well in terms of the size of our MPAs. So many of our MPAs are big, and in this case, the bigger is better in terms of the research that we've done on MPAs. Thirdly, I think, as Rob was saying, we've zoned our MPAs for different forms of use, but very importantly, at least 60% of our marine protected areas are zoned for no take, where no fishing is allowed. And these have been shown to be the most effective at protecting biodiversity and fish stocks in particular. Having said this, I think it's also important to recognize that quite a few of our MPAs were already what we call de facto MPAs. So they were put in areas that were difficult to access. And I think of places like the cliffs along the Tsutsukama coast, very difficult to get onto the coast there. Waterfall Bluff in Ponderland is another area. So these are important natural areas that we've included in MPAs. I think also there's some areas, if you think historically, like De Hoop, for example, and similarly the St. Lucia MPA north of Leven Point in the sanctuary area, both of those areas were military areas that were used as missile testing grounds. So they were closed to public access for a long time before they were given over to conservation and managed. So that's also an important fact to realize. And then lastly, I think, yeah, the actual nature of South Africa's coastline, the very powerful Agulhas Current, and the wildness and the big swells and the storminess of the coastline also does a lot to help protect our resources. Obviously, that's inside and outside MPAs, but that's another factor to consider. But that's just some reasons. Thanks.
Thanks, Bruce. I think that those are important points, especially some of the ones that maybe haven't been thought about. And I think that maybe Warren would be able to come in with some of those in terms of biodiversity protection with your research.
So there's obvious biodiversity protection, but I would say that one of the things that we have to also think about is that there's diversity protection. So I'm thinking about diversity even within a species. So as I was saying, protecting a broad range of individual types. And in this case, I'm talking particularly about physiological types that can deal with future things. And so outside the marine protected area, that doesn't happen. But the main reason that I think the MPAs have been so successful is they're old, many of them. They're large, certainly when we compare to anything that you see in most of the northern hemisphere. So for example, the UK and Europe. And what very often happens in those areas is that and their MPA will just exclude trawling and everything else is allowed. And that's their MPA. Whereas we, for example, have got these sanctuary areas. These sanctuary areas are the most critical insurance policies for us. When there are environmental, big storms, major heat waves, or cold spells, it's the individuals in the marine protected areas that are going to provide us with the seed to keep our fish populations going. And it's because of the inherent diversity that's harbored within those marine protected areas. Without those, we haven't got a good window into the future.
Thanks, Warren. I think that takes diversity to multiple levels. So it's genetic diversity as well as what we think about diversity with lots of different plants and animals. I'm going to come in with a slightly different angle, because what Bruce and Warren are saying is that we need marine protected areas that are well protected. So no-take zones, sanctuary zones. Pierre, how easy is it to manage marine protected areas?
I've seen some quite heated comments sort of popping through, and I agree. If you've got no enforcement and you're not on top of your management, and then to evaluate your management and your enforcement, you need to do the monitoring to show that you're actually keeping the animals alive, the fish in this case. It can be seen as a paper park. So is it difficult to manage? It's if I look at, I'm going to talk about the Western Cape marine protected areas. We're getting a budget that can cover 1 or 2 people, vessels and running costs. But probably about another 80% of what we do comes in from partners, sponsorships, funding. We are a parastatal kind of unit that can accept funding. So I recently welcomed a brand new specialist team for our vessels, because we really need to own the sea if we want to keep the poachers out. So if you aren't actively chasing money, chasing partners, and then we got serious enforcement operations. We linked to Pakisa, interesting integrated operations where the police, fisheries, Cape Nature, law enforcement from the municipalities, everyone works together. We plan weekly, we armed, we trained, we've got vessels, we know the hotspots, we know the kingpins. I mean, it's a full-time job just getting that planning and operations going. And if you don't put that effort in, you are not going to stop the poachers, because they are, whether it's fish or abalone or crayfish, it's high value and people need money. And as it gets really high value, it's luxuries, and then it gets turned into drugs. So we're working with syndicates, whether it's taking out, I think Donovan mentioned that reef was cleaned, or one of the speakers mentioned the reef was cleaned out. Well, that's quick bucks, and people are looking for that now. So it's hard. It's non-stop pressure. You criticize, because if you lock up people or catch people, they're always going to say they're poor. And in many cases, when they're part of the syndicates, there's a lot of money around, a lot of cash. But you are seen as, possibly picking on people. And yeah, you got to find a balance between the good guy and the bad guy. So we're doing hardcore enforcement, but we're also setting up community projects with awareness. And we're looking at working with NGOs to help us with the monitoring. And if you don't have that bigger picture, you're going to really struggle. And especially if it's, isolated marine protected area with 1 vessel and two staff members, they're going to struggle. And they will be threatened. We are threatened. It's just the way things are nowadays. I'm not so sure about a recreational fisherman threatening us. We haven't had that. We have had that at stakeholder meetings. There's probably been some hard words sent our way. But when you get into the hardcore poaching, per se, in a marine protected area, you need to have your ducks in a row. And you need full support from politicians and CEOs, etc. Thanks. I'll let other people.
Thanks, Pierre. I see that there are a few hands up here. Okay, Warren, I'm going to let you go next.
Thanks, Judy. I just wanted to comment quickly. One of my PhD students some time back, Chris Bover, did he had a look at compliance across our marine shore-based recreational fishery. And interestingly, he found that the regulations that anglers were most likely to comply with were marine protected areas. And they also had much better attitudes towards marine protected areas than any of the other kinds of regulations that they had. And what we found is that one of the biggest factors driving whether people were compliant or not was how other anglers acted and the fear of consequences from other anglers. So this is really giving us an opportunity as recreational anglers to be thinking, wow, if we want to help Pierre and his group, we need to begin putting pressure on the recreational anglers that we know are not complying with MPA regulations. That for me is one of the biggest steps. It begins with self-regulation. We have to begin taking responsibility for these areas ourselves and realizing what potential benefits they can bring. It's up to us to create an environment where recreational anglers begin complying themselves.
Thanks, Warren. I was hoping you would get on to that, because I'm going to actually ask John to talk about the Kynmouth Ski Boat Club and what you as recreational anglers have done to ensure compliance.
Look, this is one of my biggest frustrations. I've had words with Bruce most of my life about this. The scientists and the people who research the fish are experts in that field. The government guys who work at it and try and ensure compliance are like policemen. The people who know how to manage those MPAs and the people who know how to ensure compliance are the recreational fishermen. So to our way of thinking, the biggest challenge is the inefficiency in government agencies generally, and particularly the ineffectiveness of the current administration. And that's enormously exacerbated by the exclusion of recreational anglers from participation in the management of the MPAs, especially the protection of them, which severs the nexus which anglers might otherwise have with the reserves. It goes on into the next question with how they can be addressed. And from our point of view in Border, we've proven to the country and to the world for that matter, that the most important thing is not to wait for anyone else to do something about that. It's to get involved. As anglers, we owe it to our children and our children's children to ensure that the marine biodiversity is protected. So a good example was the Border Deep Sea's voluntary creation of the original marine protected area, then pushing for greater protective status. And thank heavens to the guys who did the research in the MPA, which proved its effectiveness. But by involving the anglers in that research and letting them catch the fish, most clubs were started for the purpose of competitive angling. And then they morphed into things like controlling safety and other aspects as agents for the government. In my opinion, they need to move more with the times and evolve from this. The main purpose of clubs and their associations should be to ensure the protection of the resource and to combat unwarranted regulations from government agencies. The purpose of things like fishing tournaments and get-togethers should be to engender the camaraderie necessary to achieve those objectives. That's what our involvement in Border Deep Sea showed. We are a very, very diverse group of people as anglers from all walks of life. Things like fishing competitions tend to weld them together, as does fighting unnecessary legislation and protecting the MPAs. Activities like running clubhouses, pubs, social facilities, they tend to divide rather than weld a diverse community, as not everyone drinks in the same place, and neither do they socialize all that well together. There's considerable expense and effort in operating such facilities. We need to refocus, but we need to stop whinging about the fact that government is doing nothing and do it ourselves. We've got the moral law on our side, and we have the government law on our side. So it's not been difficult in our Border Deep Sea experience.
Thanks, John. I think that's really a powerful statement in terms of, yeah, just do it. I'm going to actually just move on because you've got lots of questions that are kind of mixing together, which is quite nice. So we're also addressing question 3, which is some of the major challenges facing MPAs from a recreational fisher's perspective. So I'm going to move to you, Rob and Donovan, and ask you to maybe talk about challenges and your perspectives on what recreational anglers can actually do to overcome these, because we'll move into the last question as well. So Rob first, and then
Thanks, Judy. Yeah, it's relatively easy when I talk from like an organized or competitive angler side of things, because we all belong to clubs and all those clubs belong to SASA or whatever the mother body is. And we can all be held accountable by those bodies. If we step out of line, we can get disciplined. So us as organized anglers, it's fairly easy to control us. It's the rest of the anglers that are more difficult to control. It's the subsistence anglers. At the end of the day, there's a lot of people that are just out there, and they are basically fishing for a living now. I mean, times are tough, and a lot of people see the ocean as a source of income when they haven't got much else options. So I think that is the area where the biggest challenge lies in terms of law enforcement. The rest of us should theoretically be fairly easy to control.
Thanks, Rob. Donovan, I'd like you to talk a little bit more about self-regulation, which is really what John's talking about, because there will never be enough enforcement. And to talk to Warren's point, we need anglers to take ownership and to look after the resource for their own future. What is your perspective there?
Yeah, look, I think I can see, I agree with John and Rob on quite a few points. Yeah, it's easy for the competitive sports angler to be held accountable and to be checked on and that type of thing. But I honestly think that the self-policing or the recreational fishing community policing themselves is incredibly difficult. I think it takes a special character to be able to stand up in front of his peers and discuss, you know, people going into the Pondo MPA, you know. So there needs to be, at the end of the day, you need like a really strong functioning angling clubs, spearfishing clubs, ski boat clubs that can manage these reports and complaints. But for an individual to try and, you know, it's going to get ugly. There's just no two ways about it. You're going to have people knocking at your door at 2 o'clock in the morning type of situation. So I think I personally think that it's something that the clubs in the areas need to take better control of.
I think, Donovan, yeah, you've raised a very valid point. So I'm going to actually take this to Bruce now, because I know that Bruce and Warren and Pierre have all spent an inordinate amount of time standing in front of very angry fishermen trying to explain things. So Bruce, just your perspective, and then maybe Warren and yeah, let's just discuss how do we get that strength of character, because that's what we need.
Thanks, Judy. Yeah, so I'm actually going to jump to the last question and just put down some potential solutions because I'm seeing the questions coming up in the chat as well. So I'm just throwing these out there. The first thing we obviously need is for every MPA to have a good management plan, which is not the case at the moment. And that plan needs to include recreational fishermen, as well as all the other stakeholders in the actual development of that plan itself. So when you're putting this plan together for an MPA, you're inclusive, you include all those people. The second thing, as Pierre was saying, each MPA needs to have a staff complement that is well-trained, that has got good equipment, that has got good legislation to be able to get them to achieve and do the job. So there are people that are never going to police themselves. They're not going to be able to be self-policed, which we do need a law enforcement agency to control. And that's goes without question. So we need that aspect kind of sorted out better than it is currently. I think thirdly, in terms of managing these MPAs, each MPA around the coastline needs a forum of people that are stakeholders in that MPA, and that they meet with the management authority and hopefully the scientists as well regularly to discuss the issues, the challenges that that particular MPA is facing, because they're different in every MPA. There are different challenges and things that come up. And I think it's through these kind of committees that need to be well chaired and driven that you can start to resolve some of the issues and the facts that come up. And I think as a last one, and I will just throw it out there, and perhaps Rob can talk a little bit about it, is I think it's really important to try and include fishers, particularly recreational fishers, in some of the monitoring programs that are taking place in the MPAs, like we've done up at Isimangaliso, like I tried to do in Ponderland, because quite honestly, seeing is believing. We can talk till the cows come home about the value of MPAs, but if you take somebody there and you show them what it's really like, it's absolutely incredible that you can convert these people into ambassadors for MPAs very quickly. So by involving people as citizen scientists and monitoring programs in our MPAs, I think is a very good way to kind of win support for them. So those are just a few suggestions that I have at solving some of the really complex challenges that surround management of our MPAs.
Thanks, Bruce. I think you've raised some very important points. And the most important one I see coming across over and over again is communication, awareness, and involving people. And I think that seems to be a critical thing. We see that coming in all of our research as well. Warren, you had your hand raised for this one.
I just wanted to quickly get back to the policing and my comments on the policing. So I don't believe that it's the role of recreational anglers to apprehend other anglers and stop and report them, etc. What I do think, though, is that basically when you look at it, I think the majority of recreational anglers actually want to do the right thing. A lot of them don't have the awareness or the education to understand what the right thing is. And this is where anglers that are knowledgeable and do have this information come into the game. So it's our responsibility as aware and educated groups, the guys that know what they're talking about. It's their responsibility to impart knowledge on those that are not behaving in the way that they should. For the 10 or 15% of anglers that will not comply to regulations, it doesn't matter what you say. That's where Pierre comes in, Pierre and his groups. We have to rely on enforcement agents to police at least some of those guys that we won't convince, but by far and away, the majority of anglers do want to comply. They just lack the awareness and the knowledge of the kinds of problems that we're having. And the kinds of discussions that we've had now are what more people need to know. And that's the role that all recreational anglers can play.
I think that's a really powerful statement from what you've said, Warren, because that's actually the aim of this entire webinar, is just to help raise awareness and empower recreational anglers to understand the issues so that they can communicate more effectively. So thank you for that. Pierre.
Yeah, thanks, Judy. I think Warren's hit nail on the head. Well, most of the speakers have. Communication is critical, but it's hard work and it takes a long time. We set up the Kugelberg Marine Working Group to act as a platform for Betty's Bay Marine Protected Area in 2009. And we now in 2023, well, let's say 4 or 5 years ago, we started getting some serious buy-in, and the fishers, the recreational and the fishers, the community fishers sit in on the forum and have discussions with us, and we're using some of their vessels to deploy the BRAV rigs, etc., etc. But it takes time, and we meet on a quarterly basis every year. So this is not a quick fix. And then what I also find is the people change. So you just get a whole team of people that really understand you and support you, and then they move out, or new people move in. So I think from a management perspective, this is not going and doing a quick chat. I'm talking now at an MPA with a few people and then think you've done your job. It's ongoing. It's like you monitor the BRAV and you do your patrols. you must have these meetings and on a regular basis. You need to build a rapport with the people so they trust you, and then they will listen to you. So it's an ongoing job, yeah, and it mustn't be seen as an add-on. It's one of your core functions, in my opinion.
I think that's really, really important, Pierre. Two points there. The one is that it takes time, and just when you think you're there, it takes longer. And the second thing, it needs to be genuine engagement. So not ticking a box for stakeholder engagement, but genuine engagement. So really important there. Donovan?
Yeah, just two things quickly. So the stakeholder engagement thing. So my interaction with the team that led the Protea Banks MPA. So that was basically a stakeholder engagement. There was people from all parts putting in their input, and I can honestly say it was a fantastic experience. There was things that we discussed as a user group. We discussed it with the management of the project, and I'd say probably 90% of our concerns were seriously considered. So it was a really unique opportunity. So that type of thing, and I've talked about it a lot during that process, is things like displays and not necessarily a museum, but that sort of concept where people can easily see why is an area being protected, slides or whatever it might be. I think there's an example of something that needs a lot of attention. Is the Sodwana Bay scuba diving MPA. I think there was very poor interaction with user groups in creating that sort of MPA. And that's a prime example of the user groups not communicating.
Thanks, Donovan. What you've said there resonates with research that we did in Alawal Shoal, where many of the people that we interviewed about the Alawal Shoal MPA said we need an easy access to the information about why the MPA is there, what its benefits are, what are the challenges, how does it work, etc. And that's part of the reason why we started MPA Day, was really to be able to open a platform for these kind of discussions, because there are pros and cons, absolutely, and we need to be able to address them all. So thank you for raising that. We are now at 4 minutes past 8. The time seems to have just flown by, and I know that there's a lot more that everyone would like to say. What I am going to do is quickly run around the room. We haven't even got to questions. There are a whole lot of questions, and there are chat questions as well. We'll try and answer those if people want to stay on a little bit longer. But I'm just going to quickly run around the room, and I'm just going to ask everyone just to say one short closing statement. So, Rob, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd just like to say we're focusing a lot on the challenges and what needs to be improved. But I think if we look back 5 years, as short as 5 years, I think the general awareness amongst the recreational angler has increased hugely. So as much as it feels like we're bashing our head against a brick wall constantly, I think if we step back, look at where we've come from in a relatively short space of time, we actually realize how much awareness we have created. And I think that can give us hope going forward.
Thanks, Rob. That's really, really good and very encouraging. So thank you. John, short closing statements.
Yeah, you've got to light the fires amongst the younger guys. They're much more disposed towards conservation and the older guys who used to plunder the resource. And I get very frustrated when I hear the negativity that is put out here, because someone should go and persuade a student to do research on the establishment of the Amatola MPAs. And out of that research, it will be published and found to be relatively easy to formulate them and to police them. We did it. And we had no help. We had no backing from government. In fact, most of the government agencies just got in the way. If we hadn't had them, we might have done a better job. And the other point is, I see a comment saying, like, this particular False Bay reserve is being poached. Well, the point is, you can't make an elephant reserve in the middle of the Transkei. You're not going to get it going. So your location of an MPA is very important. And the biggest importance about it is how you're going to protect it and what is its value to the people that have got an interest in it. This is not rocket science, it's simple stuff.
Thanks, John, and thank you for showing us that it could be done. Donovan.
Yes, look, I think like most of us have agreed to here that there's definitely been a big change in the perspective and the consideration for the need for MPAs. So yeah, like I think the general recreational angler or spearfisherman is fully into this. One thing that, and I need to use this opportunity, is the lack of information or the lack of guidelines that is available to the recreational angler. I'm preparing for national championships in Port Elizabeth next year, and I'm trying to research the Sardinia Bay MPA, and you cannot get information. I don't know where that thing is. I'm a visitor to the area. So that type of information needs to be easily available. It needs to be, and for all the MPAs, it needs to be like flashcards almost. So yeah, that's my take on this.
Thanks, Donovan, because the important thing there is communication with the recreational angling fraternity. So we started creating videos that explain the zonation of all the KZN MPAs and what the zonation is and how it works. And maybe we need those for all of the MPAs around the coast, with simple short video that says exactly how the zonation works. So we will undertake between us as a team to get more of those done and out there, and then share them with the community that joined us online for this webinar. So good point. Sardinia Bay is a tricky one. I'm going to go to Pierre, last comment, then Warren, and then Bruce, because this was his idea. He gets to have the last say.
Fair enough. I think anything's possible, as long as, I'm talking about management now. There are resources and there are people, but the manager must really genuinely want to make a difference. So when he or she talks to anglers, it must be with honesty, talks to fishers, and when there's time for the stick, the anti-poaching side of things, it must happen in an integrated way and a really forceful way. So you make a difference, and then it's possible. There are good people out there that want to work with us as managers, but we need to facilitate them to be able to work with us. And then we can do it, and we can do it.
Thanks, Pierre. I think you're showing that you are doing it, and that's the important thing. So thank you. We can and will and are. Thank you. Warren.
Yeah, so I first want to just say about Pierre is that we've been working in one of the MPAs that they are responsible for, and we found very significant evidence that the fish are protected compared to areas outside that MPA, the Kokama MPA. So clearly they are doing a good job. The science supports it quite clearly. I just wanted to say that MPAs are really the key to our future as recreational anglers. The more research that we're doing, the more we're realizing how fundamental they are currently, but are going to be into the future particularly. If we don't protect the fish of the future that are harbored in marine protected areas, we're not going to have viable recreational fisheries in the future. And that means that we have also a big role to play. And our role, the role that we play, is by spreading these messages about marine protected areas, educating our fellow recreational anglers and making sure that they understand the consequences of non-compliance, not for their own, getting getting penalties or whatever the case is, but for what they're doing to their future recreational fisheries. And so if we can do that, then I think we're definitely on the right path to sort of sustainable recreational fisheries.
Thanks, Warren. I think that's a really, really nice way to sum it up. Thank you. And Bruce, this was all your idea, your final comments.
Thank you, Judy. Well, firstly, I'd just like to thank all my colleagues around the table this evening that have given their time and their wisdom in this little discussion, and also to everybody who's out there and been listening and have posted chats. I'm sorry that we haven't been able to answer everybody's questions, but I hope you've all found this interesting and learned something from it. To finish off with, a couple of us have recently published 3 scientific papers in African Journal of Marine Science, which I'm sure we can make PDFs available, but they focus on 3 aspects. One was the ecological effectiveness of MPAs, one was on the socio-economic effectiveness, and the third one, and the most difficult one, was on the management and governance of our MPAs. And in each of those 3 papers, we've tried to summarize a lot of what has happened and what is currently known about South Africa's MPAs. So anyone in the audience who would like to sort of read some more about this, I can really recommend that those will be useful reads, and you'll find them interesting. But yeah, thank you very much, everybody, and thank you especially Judy for helping keep us on time and under control. But thanks from my side. Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce. And then just a final thank you from me to all of our panelists. Thank you for sharing so honestly and sharing your perspectives with such a wide audience. We had up to just over 110 people with us. So it's been a well-attended webinar. Thank you to everyone who actually participated, shared ideas, the chats. There's been a really lots and lots of discussion on the chats as well. We will start sharing information. We'll try and share as much as we can with you all. And then let's keep the conversation going. Let's not just restrict it to MPA Day. This is not something that we discuss once a year and forget. This is everyday stuff. So let's work out a way of keeping that conversation going. So thank you so much, all of you. I'm not sure about you, but I'm ready for a small drink now at the end of MPA Day. So thank you, all of you. Thank you to Flo for hosting us. Thank you, participants, everybody. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you to our technical support. I think it went well.
Yes, you're welcome. You're welcome. And yes, it did go very well. I even learned a lot. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Graham.
Thanks so much. Hope you guys have a good evening.
Is there any way of keeping the discussion? Because there were such useful things in the discussion.
Yes. You can still talk. There is still 30 attendees still on. You can still continue if you want to.
No, I'm just I'm thinking of just keeping the comments. Is there any way?
Oh yeah, you can leave. Yes, I can leave the chat open, but I have to leave the call open as well.
Oh,
but you can mute yourself and stop your video, and you can respond to everyone by chat if you want.
No, I think we're all good to go. So yeah, sorry we can't save the chat, but yeah, thank you. Thanks very much.
Yeah, and this was recorded, hey? So we will have a copy, and we're going to put it onto YouTube for people who weren't able to listen tonight.
Yes, it would take a few hours for the video to get ready, so we'll probably give it to you tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
No, it's not no rush. We'll get
just whenever it's ready and done. If you can give us the YouTube link, because I've already had a few people who couldn't make it tonight who wanted to listen.
Okay, no, it's not a problem at all.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
No, you're welcome. Okay. Enjoy your night.
Good night. Bye. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Graham. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.